Hey, good morning, everybody. You're here with Bubba Da Vinci live on a Saturday stream. Um, Today is Saturday, my dump day. And what did I mean by dump day? Um, I'm just going to go ahead and just cover a bunch of different things that we kind of touched on during the week and I have going on. Um, and just kind of ponder, ponder today. I'm feeling like I need to ponder a lot more recently. I've got so much going on, and there's so much going on in the world. And I feel like the last maybe 7, 8, 9 months, um, I'm watching all the changes that are going on. And up to this point, I've been relatively distant on watching what those changes are. And I'm seeing people that I've known for years go back and evaluate what they've done the last 12 months and trying to decide whether they want to go a different direction in their lives or just change things up, especially content creators. There's about 6 or 7 content creators that I've been talking to that are going to cease creating. Um, it's thank you. I do. I think I do have good hair today. Um, it's always interesting, and I'm going to move my camera around again. I should have done this earlier. It's always interesting when people take on new endeavors. And I'm not talking about me doing this to the 1, 2, 5, 10 of you guys that join during the week or the daily basis. Because again, this is not I don't see this as a job. I see this as therapeutic. I see this as kind of like a live diary. Um, and unfortunately, if you were to talk to my family, whether something's a hobby or work, I'm a type A personality. Hence, I start doing backgrounds. I start, I try to enhance my setup with the help of some friends. I want to understand the streaming portion. Preach. There you go. How you doing, Farm Don? Um, One of the things I do have to get done here in the very near future before we really get into the card stuff is block those bots. But I have, that's going to be worked on, but everything else. But when you're talking to people who made a major adjustment in their life, to try to do something like content creation, and they either succeed marginally, or even if they succeed but they didn't get out of it what they thought they were going to get out of it, I feel bad for them. And yesterday I had like 3 conversations specifically on the phone, with people. Yep, you're good. Um, People who put significant time and money into making a change in their life, and we'll stay with content creation for now, and ended up, again, not either enjoying it, or hitting roadblocks, or realizing that it didn't fulfill the need that they thought it was going to fulfill. And 2 of the people I talked to yesterday did some work for us in the past, and the conversations came up because out of the blue I got phone calls and saying, hey, what do you got going on the next couple of months through winter? Looking for something to do. And I'm like, well, I don't have anything right now. And I said, I thought you were doing content creation. I thought it was going fairly well. And it's like, they had different reasons to getting off a lot of it. And I think wifey's like says, sometimes things get stale and you have to change them up. And I agree with that. But that's the reason why they went into content creation, right? They thought everybody thinks that that's the magic bullet, and they're gonna make friends and they're gonna do all this stuff. And I find it very difficult to get up every morning, sit here at 7 a.m. and think about what I'm going to talk about. So when I come to the table, I just kind of say, all right, pretend like no one is, farmed on, wifey, missing O. It's like no one is actually following, and I'm just talking to myself. And I'm okay with that because what I'm doing here, like I said, is like a digital diary. But for these people, they thought this was a career change. And, one of them was like, the drama that came with it is definitely not something I was looking for. People are getting involved in your lives and they're stalking and lurking and, doing all these different things. And it's not good. The other person I talked to on the phone was just like, monetization's horrible. I'm pushing and pushing and pushing for friends to do subs and things like that. And depending on what platform you're on, right? And getting my ad revenue, and sometimes my revenue gets dropped because I've said something, done something, broken a rule, or it's just not coming in, or my numbers aren't there. And I had a third person I was chatting with online, and she's taking a month off to go visit family and everything else, because she's saying that there's a massive slump going into October and November, September, October, November, that she's worried about, making enough money. So she's just going to go take this time to go see family and things like that. And it's because a lot of countries are pulling back their marketing and their ad revenue, waiting for the presidential election to end. And I get that. I get all this. I mean, every 4 years we got the same crap. But to see them discouraged, first, my attitude with everything is, plan for the worst and hope for the best. The worst case scenario is I get up every morning at 7:00 in the morning and I'm talking to myself. Best case scenario is someone finds this entertaining, interesting, the information I'm putting out there worthwhile, and then that's a bonus, right? So plan for nobody, get something else. It's hard to do that when you're looking at trying to make this a career change. And then even more people I know recently have just been laid off, and hearing that, okay, I'm laid off for this period of time or indefinitely because of the economy. And what do I do here? Because when usually you lay off a category of people, and I'm not talking about them as individuals, but like computer programmers or railroad workers or whatever it is, it's usually across the industry. It's not one business in one town or city that's doing it. There's usually a problem with that job type. And it's either oversaturated or people, companies hired too many people when you're feasting, and when famine cuts, you automatically start cutting people. And usually we try to give people extra work and jobs. There's always more work, but this year, as a company who works with marketing and other companies, we're watching other people's budgets there, and we have to tighten down and things like that. So I'm watching, and I'm just kind of feeling, wow, I'm now seeing the effects. I was seeing the effects of the cost of groceries hitting everybody. I was seeing the cost of travel hitting everybody. I was seeing all these different things, and now I'm seeing the job market, affected. And unemployment, we talked about this the other day, is still horrible here in the United States. I don't know where it is in the rest of the world. We talked about China having major issues. So that's two major countries where people aren't getting paid and there's things going on. And again, I think that people just need to start looking at their spending habits, except for on this show. If you want to sub on this show, throw the money at me. I'm just kidding. Please do. I mean, if you want to, please do. We're almost up to 30 days of casting. I'm going to tell you how much money we've made. I set my account up that it just holds the money. And then when we get up to, if I ever get up to $500, I think we talked about this, we're going to find someone to donate this money to. So if you want to donate, that's where the money is going to go. So that in that case, sub, don't sub, whatever. But don't do it because you think you're helping me personally. Other than it boosts my ego a little bit when I get a sub. But I'll be honest, it doesn't last very long because again, it's easy to forget that after someone did it and you thank them. It's hard to keep track of all this stuff, honestly. Anyway, so my brain dump and my brain chemistry right now is kind of in the being contemplative. Is that a word? That's a word. And enjoying that thought process, but also worried for friends and families and people that I know that maybe don't take being prepared as seriously as I try to. Although, like I said, this is a bad year for me. I feel bad for Farm Don, although Farm Don's got a great job and he's a good friend and not that my friendship would do anything to help him financially or things like that, but he had damage to his house. It was just like there's a lot of things going on out there right now that are unforeseen and that are affecting a lot of the world, i.e. doing my news stuff today. There's an interesting thing popped up, which I was angry. Then I was kind of like, and then I was like, what the F do you do? So I've mentioned a couple different times, I've been to Africa a couple different times. My daughter just got back. She's been to Africa twice on, I call them missions, but for the school. One for the school and one for the church where they've gone over and done work. The one for the church, they went over and helped build wells. The one for the school, they went to the school sent them to a city or a town or a village. It was actually a village, I believe. And their job was to sit down and help the village rebuild their economic profile and their budgeting and everything else, because a lot of these villages have never really had to, they just kind of live and they do what they need to do, but they really don't have full budgets and plans and understand what things are available with their government and foreign governments and everything else. And so all these kids that had been interning at a think tank and went back to school went over there and spent 3 weeks sitting down and creating a development plan for the village, which it was very fruitful apparently for the village and for the students. The students all came back pretty pumped about it. But anyway, one of the countries that my daughter went and visited popped up on my screen on a news feed, and it's Namibia, 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 and it's down in South Africa, and they've had a drought, and this is one of the areas that my daughter went to for trying to dig wells for some of the villages, because there's a major drought going on over there, which isn't uncommon in Africa, but this is the worst drought that they've had in 100 years. And usually when these countries have droughts, who it affects is the animal population. Animals die off, and it affects the people as well, because they can't plant, they can't harvest grains, things like that. The animals are dying off. But this country is in such dire straits that it announced for the first time in 100 years they're doing an animal culling. And they're not doing an animal culling like we do here in the United States, or like specifically like I know Iowa. We do cullings all the time, where you have an overpopulation of a specific species, deer, turkey, whatever, and the overpopulation is causing damage to the environment. So too many deer grazing, or too many deer crossing the road and cars hitting them because there's an overpopulation and they're grazing animals and they have to move from one field to the next, and they get out in the traffic and they get hit, cars get damaged, they die, causes problems. So, or overpopulation of deer, and so they're grazing out all the grasses, and there's too many, so some of them are starving and getting diseased. So what'll happen is the state or the federal government will authorize a culling, and that season, where normally you might say you have hunting permits to hunt 10,000 deer, they'll say we need to take another 10,000 deer out, and or turkey or whatever, and they will open up, and then once you get your couple of tags that you are legally authorized to buy, and those numbers are taken out, the other tags are available either for a very low dollar amount or for free. And usually, when you're managing a species, part of the management process is they tell you what you can hunt. So you can take one buck and one doe, or one any sex, or if it's a turkey, you can take a tom, but you can't take a jake, or you can't take a hen. When cullings come up, they want to take out both sides of the fence, both hens and bucks, or the males and females. And additionally, you can usually take out, in like a turkey's case, a young turkey is called a jake. And so you can take out a jake, or you can take out a young deer. The point of it is to reduce the population on both sides, both female and male of the species. So anyway, I'm giving you an explanation of culling. So in Africa, they're actually culling animals, but they're culling wild animals that are usually not animals that you would cull. And they're using it for meat to feed the actual population of the country, because people are starving. And they're also looking at it as an environmental thing, because their point is, and they're trying to defend themselves on an international scale, and I'll explain why here in a second, is they're also saying that there's so little water, and everything is so dry, there's no nutrition in what is out there in the plains, that these animals are going to die anyway. And so instead of having them die and not help anything other than maybe the other wild population of the wild animals, that they could feed the people who are starving. And I mean, a large percentage of their population is starving right now. Reminds me of some of the videos we used to see in the 60s and 70s and early 80s about kids starving, and we need to send a bag of rice to Africa because these kids are starving, and showing kids with bloated bellies and things like that. But it was the species that threw me off, because I'm a hunter. I love to hunt, but I don't hunt for trophy. And while I don't look down at anybody that's trophy hunters, especially since my brother-in-laws are all trophy hunters. And that doesn't mean they shoot it for the trophy and they waste everything. My one brother-in-law will pass on 50 deer and wait for the one that he knows is trophy size. And then he will take that animal and then fill his freezer, but he also gets his trophy. So for him, it's equally as important to fill his freezer as it is to get the trophy. I've never known him to have to take a deer or any animal, because there's so many, and not fill his freezer, although he would. Honestly, he's one of those hunters that if he didn't see a trophy deer all season, or muley or elk or whatever, he would just not shoot, and he would probably go without filling his freezer, because that's how important the trophies are to him. But luckily, every year he gets his trophy, and then he shoots his doe and he gets it filled up. But anyway, point being that there's a lot of trophy hunters out there. I'm not one of them. I only hunt to fill the freezer, and I don't hunt species that I can't eat or I wouldn't normally eat. And so I'm not going to go shoot, I can't think of one, a mountain lion, because I'm probably not going to eat the mountain lion. Although I hear mountain lion's actually pretty tasty, but that's not what's going to fill my freezer. You know, so that just doesn't make sense to me. Again, not looking down on anybody that does do the hunting. As long as they're hunting legally, that's fine. So anyway, in this country, they have multiple species that I think edu and things like that I think are fine to hunt. They're grazing animals, just like deer, tens and hundreds of thousands of them, going and grazing the grasses. So taking those out there. The ones that did surprise me were elephants, hippos, zebras, water buffalo or buffalo. And there was actually 2 species of buffalo. And those are animals that I just wouldn't normally think of as species that you would want to cull. So first of all, 3 of those are an endangered species list. In most countries in Africa, you can't legally hunt them. And if there is a hunting, it is a process where tags are sold off and a very specific number are taken every year in a calculation to keep balance within these groups, especially where the predator-prey ratio has been thrown off. But elephants have been protected for a very long time because they are targeted, by people hunting for the ivory that will kill them off and just leave the carcasses after taking the ivory. Poaching is still very, very big and profitable in Africa. Hippos are the same thing. Hippos are killed every year for the ivory in their tusks. Zebra. Now, I guess in some countries they do eat horse. Lots of places in Europe and things like that, I've eaten horse, although here in the United States, they are either decorative animals or beasts of burden, animals that we ride and we look at as pets. But in a lot of countries, you eat horses. And so I guess zebra is not that far off, but that one did throw me off. And the buffalo, buffalo counts are down to, and they're protected, certain species of the buffalo. And, so to hear that they are culling all these animals in order to feed the population, my first instinct was, okay, why have environmental protection laws if you're just going to change the rules and start killing these animals off? Even if it's to feed other people, there's countries that will help. There's got to be other methods than doing that. Then I had to take a hard look and finish reading the stories and everything else and realizing that just like here in the United States, that if you do take that attitude and you do not take responsibility for the overpopulation because there are less natural ways for these animals to be taken out, a la predators, because of the growing cities and population. So there are, less and less territory for predators to be able to flourish, that these populations get huge. And I see it here in Iowa every year where you'll see sickly deer or sickly animals because populations get too high. They get chronic waste disease, brain disease. So if you do kill them, you can't even eat them. And those are all diseases based on overpopulation and the herds getting sick and then spreading it to and these deer travel across state lines. They don't see a state border. And so overpopulation in one state and deer getting sick, they will cross the border and try to find food in another state, therefore taking the disease into that state with them. So the problems just, exacerbate. So, and I thought I started thinking about that line and read a report by a group that said that, thousands of these animals will die in the drought. I started having to consider, so maybe this is a more humane way to handle this, meaning that it would be better for professional hunters to go out there and take these animals out quickly and cleanly, and then use that food to feed the population than to have animals out there that are starving painfully. And I will tell you that whenever you have populations that are starving, they start to encroach and add danger to cities and human population. You see it with bear up in Alaska. You see it, with even with deer and animals like that. What they'll do is they will come in if they know that there's animals being fed, raccoon, bobcat, things like that, and come in where the domestic animals are because they're healthier and there's food around there, and they'll come and break into houses. They will eat your pets. They will do things that cause damage around there, and therefore causing issues again, for both sides. So while I feel horrible that they're having a drought that lasts 100 years. I feel horrible that they're having to take such drastic measures as to have to cull animals that are on the endangered or protected species list, like elephants and hippos, etc. I think I have a good understanding, and I think I can understand and find a way to mentally go, well, I don't think this is great or okay. I understand why it needs to be done. All I can do is just, say a few prayers for those people. No one wants to see a child starve or anybody starve, and no one wants to see populations of beautiful animals decimated but nature is nature, right? You have to deal with the kind of things that are being thrown at you, and a drought is horrible. Farmers here in the U.S., most of you, I don't know how old you guys are. In the U.S., we had a horrible drought. I want to say it was late 70s, early 80s, where farms were being decimated here in the U.S. and singers got together, and there was a thing called Farm Aid, where people were singing to help people keep their farms, because we had major droughts all through the Midwest and nothing was growing. And farmers were going out of business and starving. And, the population in the United States, food costs were outrageous because of our droughts. Luckily everything changed and we made it through it. And I'm sure, these countries in Africa, I mean, it's secular, and they will come out of it too. But they have to go through these hard times as part of it. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. I actually am having a phone call with my daughter later on this afternoon. I just want to get her feeling on it. I mean, she was just there, beginning of the year, first, I think it was spring break that she went over to Africa, and to go someplace and try to solve a problem. Drought was really just, they're coming in a year of drought. The drought was really just starting to hit them pretty hard. And so they're going over there and trying to tap water sources and build wells for these towns that are more sustainable. And then you're hearing that, the water tables are completely dropped. The water is now hazardous, and the animals are dying of thirst and starvation, and the population is too. And it's like, how do you, as a 20-year-old young lady, woman, 20, I guess would be a woman. And how do you look back at trying to help a situation like that? And how do you feel? How does that affect you mentally, emotionally? She made friends over there. She met kids and parents and things like that were happy that they were there to help. And I don't know if the village they worked in is doing better than other villages, but I have to imagine that, in just like when you're in a city, you could live in Los Angeles and the economy is affecting, populations other place, but it's going to affect a certain percentage of the population in LA too. So, those people might have friends or family that are suffering. How do you take that on, internally, emotionally, physically, and be able to deal with that? I'm interested because at my age, I have the way I deal with things, but I worry about my daughters. I worry about all kids my daughter's age, my youngest and middle and everything else, because they've lived most of their lives in feast, right? I mean, they've really never known any. I mean, they all have iPhones or phones. Everybody's on Netflix. Everybody's got computers. I mean, everybody's had so much abundance that they've never known suffering to any large degree. And I'm not saying everybody, people have problems paying bills and they don't do things, but even that isn't the same sort of situation. And everybody wants to help. Like when I went to the Ukraine to feed people and things like that, and you want to help, and you leave and you go back and you go, here we are going into year 3, and people over there are still fighting a war. Yeah, do I want to go back and put on a bulletproof vest again and go back over there and help with the cause again? Probably. Would I make it out a second time? Who knows? But you want to help, but then you start internalizing how much can you really do to try to change the world. Do what you can, but can you do that much? And if I'm young, when I was in my 20s, I was Superman. I joined the military. I was getting sent all over the place, and I believed every place that they dropped me, I was going to change everything. I was so egotistical. I really believed that we went in there, we knew what the solutions were. We were going to kick ass and take names, and when we left, that place was going to be so much better than it was, better now after than it was when we walked in. And I look back now, and I'm like, yeah, boy, I was so delusional. We went in there and we'd go in and we probably made things worse more often than not. I mean, I think they were happy to have us there and they were happy to have our supplies, but bringing something in and then leaving doesn't solve a problem. It's that old proverb, give a man a fish he eats for a day, teach a man a fish he eats for a lifetime. That's what I see now. I didn't understand it back then. I mean, I understood it, but I didn't understand it. And we were over there throwing fish all over the place. I mean, we'd go into countries in South America. And my capstone for the first couple of years of my military was Central and South America. And then my capstone ended up being the Middle East. And a lot of those countries we went into, those people were desperate for food. The kids were desperate for food. And I was tossing out fish all day long. And man, I felt good. I felt like a king. They felt good for a day. And then we'd pull our asses out of those countries. And I don't think we did what we intended to do. Maybe we did. Maybe it was just the intent of what the government wanted me to do, and the intent of what we actually did, or I thought we were doing, was just different. I don't know. Told you, this is a brain dump day. This is contemplative day. Let's move on to a different thing, world changing. So I've mentioned dozens of times, I have 3 daughters. All 3 of my daughters have the travel bug, as they're my daughters. I travel a lot. And, I think as they grew up with the romanticized travel bug, meaning that when I grew up and I started my travel life, which was elementary school, junior high, high school. I mean, I was blessed and lucky that I had family, military family, and family that traveled to different countries. So I got to travel quite a bit when I was young. And when I became an adult and I traveled for the military, and then getting into a professional life, every job I've taken has had travel involved, and some pretty cool travel. That I would, when my daughters were born, I would tell them stories about going to China when China was a lot rougher, and going to these villages and being, one of the few white people they had ever seen. Or going to countries and being able to see exotic things that, buildings that were thousands of years old and things like that. But one of the coolest thing I used to tell my daughters was going to a country for the first time, opening up your passport, getting that rubber stamp put into your passport, showing that you had been someplace. And I know me, like many people from my generation, but getting a passport was it was like getting the first set of keys to your car, right? It's like it was freedom. Yeah, you might not be going anywhere yet. You might just be going to the 7-Eleven down the street, and then coming back. But having those keys and the ability to go past 7-Eleven and leave the town, or going past the town and leaving the city, and going past the city and leaving the state, and just constantly going, it's in a sense of empowerment that, at least here in the US, a lot of people, it's almost a moral imperative, if you will. Thanks, Kong. I'll look at your cheap reviews later. Not okay. You know, the moral imperative. The moral imperative. That's where I was at. And the next step to that was getting your passport. The second you got your passport, you opened it up and you looked at how many squares you had in it, and you fantasized about where your first stamp would be. I have to guess that most people had fairly exotic feelings and dreams about where that would be. I believe for most people, it's probably just across their border. In the United States, it would be Mexico or Canada. And getting that first stamp, even though for a lot of people, it's like, when I lived in California, it was literally a couple of hour drive to go get that first stamp. And a short flight or a longer drive to get it across our northern border, it could get to pretty easily. And I believe, I'm pretty positive, my first stamp was Mexico, on a vacation down to Mexico. And my second stamp was Canada. I knew my second stamp was Canada. It was a hunting trip with my grandpa. But getting that passport and getting that done. But, when I started getting, some more exotic, and back then when you're an American, exotic is, UK or Ireland or Spain. I mean, no one would consider those exotic now, but, in the 70s and early 80s, people didn't try, you used to dress up to travel on a plane. Seriously. I remember my grandmother and my grandfather making me get into a suit to go travel on a plane. This was probably 73, 74, because, you're going on a plane. This was a major excursion. This was not inexpensive. It was, it was a big deal. And so, you traveled in nicer clothes. Nowadays, hell, you got girls getting on in booty shorts. Everybody's in sweatpants. Most people look like they're hungover. It's like there's no class to travel. And when I say there's no class to travel, I'm talking about no class in the individuals. And so many people travel business class and first class now because of upgrades and things like that you can get done. There is no social status. And I'm not saying there should be. I'm just saying there's been a major change in travel. And so my daughters were disappointed, all three of them. They got their passports very early, and they got some stamps from traveling with me or as a family to go do something. But as they've learned to travel on their own and they've been going places, fewer and fewer countries require or give a stamp out anymore. Most people are doing digital entry. And so when we went to Japan, we didn't get a stamp on our passport. Matter of fact, they glanced at the passport, but everything was done by biometrics. You went in, you turned in all your paperwork. They scanned your fingers coming in. I have been over there multiple times, so I went into a different line where boop, and I just did the biometrics going in. My daughters had to go to a machine that they put their passport into, and it scanned it. And then they put their fingerprints on, and then they were allowed in. So all it did was read the barcode at the bottom, made sure that their passports were legitimate, and then we were through. And they're like, "Where's our stamp?" And I said, "Well, apparently Japan doesn't do that anymore. Neither does Singapore. Neither does a lot of countries." One of the some of the countries they could count on still were the Europeans. The Europeans still, for the most part, stamp your passport in and out and everything else. Well, they just announced that there will no longer be any EU stamping of passports. They are going to a biometric scan-in system. And, my daughter sent this to me because she was so disappointed. She was just like, so at this point, when are they just going to give us a card? If all we're going to do is scan things now, do we even need the pages? Because The front of your passport is usually laminated. I was going to bring mine over this morning, but I forgot. And it's almost like a hard card. And she's right. It's like at that point, do you even need to have a book? And it really takes away from it. Now, one of the things the European website was talking about, the travel website was talking about after this new law was passed, is that you will be able to go to like post offices or places like that and pay to get a stamp put into your passport, but it is not an entry passport stamp. It doesn't mean anything. It's just they're realizing that there are people out there that will want to collect, and they're even talking about making a European passport book that is just for commercial use when you come into any of the countries. And I laughed and I said, I don't know if they still do this because it's been so long since I've been to Disneyland. But when I was a kid, when you went into Disneyland, they had 3 things that you could get. You had the Disney autograph book, which had, you flip the pages and it had all the characters that were at that park, and your job was to find those characters and get them to sign. And then they had the Disney passport, which is you went into the different zones and very specific rides, and they would stamp your passport book, because you have to remember, Disney was built, the original Disneyland, and I think Disney World too, was built in zones like you were going to different countries or different parts of the world. The African, the jungle ride and things like that. It was supposed to be like a worldwide experience in one park. So when you would go to these different world experiences, you could get a stamp in your passport. And then the third thing was a collector's portfolio. Back then, and again, they're all digital, you used to get a book of tickets that they would take and they'd tear and they'd stamp them, that you would use for the rides. And if you had one of those books, then you would slide it into the sleeve and you'd have your collection of everything that you did. So even Disney, as far back as whenever Disneyland was founded, 50s, realized that people wanted to be able to memorialize where they went, even if it was in a freaking amusement park. And nowadays, with technology getting to where it is, that's going the way of the dinosaur, or I should say the way of the VHS tape, right? It's just the next evolution. But my daughters all 3 of my daughters are very sad about it. They have passports now that have maybe 5 or 6 pages with stamps in it, but the other 15 pages will now remain forever blank. And my one daughter, made a very, I think her comment was probably very poignant, which is, so can I just cut the front page out now and not have to carry this bulky thing around if I'm never going to get anything again? And I guess I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm assuming economically, and as far as security in a country, going biometric and digital, I do too. I mean, I luckily I've been blessed and I have a lot of stamps, and I don't know if I think I'd rather wait in line. I mean, maybe a solution would be if there's a section that people, like one walkthrough place where people can go and they still use the manual process. And if you don't mind queuing up for 45 minutes, they take your passport and they still stamp it. And everybody else can do the quick system, a la global entry into the US. I don't need a stamp anymore. I mean, I just go to global entry, it checks my eyeballs and checks my fingers, and I just walk through. And it's quick and easy. Don't even have to pull up my passport anymore. But a country I've never been to, I'd stand in a line for 30, 40 minutes and get that stamp. I just don't think people think far enough, and they don't think about the repercussions of when they do things like this. And, maybe, wifey's 13-year-old son doesn't care because he hasn't had a chance to travel yet. And so to him, it hasn't sunk in, but to multiple generations that this was their dream, and part of getting their passport was their freedom, and part of showing what they've done and where they've gone is that stamp. I think it's kind of depressing. I think it's, it's going to be, very sad for a lot of people until it just becomes the norm. Um, and I think just kind of take it one step further. It makes me think of my grandmother. When my grandmother and grandfather would let me travel with them, and when I got to travel to these different countries, my grandmother had the stamp, but my grandmother's greatest joy was bringing these little spoons back that she'd hang up. She had these big boxes that you hung these spoons in, and she had them from all over the world in all kinds of cities. And it was her pride and joy. And I remember when she passed, no one wanted those spoons. But in her generation, people coming over and seeing little thimbles of where you visited, or spoons, or collect those kind of collector things, those collections on your wall, or things like that, were conversation pieces that she took a lot of pride in. All these, I remember being 14, 15 years old and coming home, well, most of you guys don't know, I lived with my grandmother for multiple years during high school. And so coming home to my grandmother's house and walking in and having, all these old ladies sitting in the living room having little sandwiches and drinking, back then it was probably martinis. These women drank a lot. But anyway, they were sitting there and they'd be fawning over, doing things. More than that, I remember my grandmother and grandmother inviting people over for slideshows of the trips we would take. And I remember having to sit there and watching these slideshows and going, how are all these people doing all these oohs and ahs? Don't you know you can watch this stuff on TV? But it was such a big deal for people to get together when they had their trip and come over and see a slideshow and look at the souvenirs. I try to buy souvenirs for people now, and I buy souvenirs for myself, but it's definitely not the same sort of environment of the souvenirs. Usually it's a food item or whatever, because I know most of the people I'm friends with don't want the clutter in their houses. If I bought Farm Don a spoon from a country, it might get tossed in his drawer. More than likely, it's going to get donated to the Salvation Army or something. Not because he doesn't appreciate me getting him something. It's just, what the F is he going to do with the mini spoon with the little thing on the top that says the UK or Ireland, right? He doesn't. That's not his style or his collection. Unless he's doing Coke again, then he maybe uses to snort Coke. But I'm just kidding. He doesn't do Coke, and that's not his style. But yeah, my point being that, those sorts of things just don't have any significance anymore. And as I grew up and she grew older and things like that, they stayed up there, but people quickly forgot people even did those sorts of things. My generation, I gave out magnets a lot. I would go all over the place and I was like, oh, I got to buy 10 souvenirs. I'm getting everybody magnets. Farm Don. He didn't say anything, but I'm sure there's kind of like an underlying, don't say crap like that. And I look back now and I remember even being in my 30s before my mom passed away and looking at her refrigerator covered in magnets, that I had brought her back magnets from wherever country I was in, and looking at there, and she felt obligated to put those magnets up on the fridge. And it's like they serve no purpose other than the just massive hodgepodge of magnets all over the fridge. And I remember asking her one day, it's like, do you use the magnets for anything? And she said, no, but you gave them to me, so I put them up. And I was thinking about all the friends that I gave magnets to, and I'm like, I wonder where all those magnets are right now, because they were always bizarre, over built up or flat, that has a little picture of it or wherever you were. But a lot of them were built up like London Bridge, and it was like this big bulky clay bridge that you put up there, and you put it on you'd put this monstrosity of a magnet on your refrigerator. And I'm sure people would walk by and go, oh, that's attractive. So yeah, I guess, like I said, being very contemplative right now. I don't know where we're going. What's the joy? I guess everybody's taking photos and doing things like that, with everybody having access to a phone and photos and videos, but I guess that's where our memories are going, which is just making them digital and throwing them onto another hard drive until you run out of space on your phone. You start deleting them. I actually spent an hour yesterday doing a photo dump from my phone from all the events I went to, and I filled up quite a bit of space on a drive, and I'm thinking I'm never going to remember half of these. It's like, yeah, I don't feel like there's anything significant that we intangible that we that makes me remember those places other than my time, like when I travel with Farm Don and Billy and some of the people like you I get when I meet you guys at these events. Those things stick in my head and those things become special. But a lot of the time there's nothing tangible I bring back. I take those photos, but I don't have photos on my wall anymore. Right. I just, when I was growing up, it seemed like there were always photos on the wall and photos on tables and things like that. And I visit people's houses and everything else. Because you have them all on your phone, it doesn't seem like people even bother printing them up as much anymore. And I guess part of me is just like, I'm starting to miss all those tangible things. Feels like everything is intangible nowadays. It's like, here I am having a conversation with 7 people, and it used to be something you do on the phone or you do in person and everything else. And this is great to be able to communicate this way. But, it's not as great as hanging out with Farm Don or Billy or anybody late at night over a beer or cup of tea or whatever it is that we're doing at that point, and just having a good conversation and just, interpersonal interaction. Yeah. So anyway, those are the 2 big stories of the day as far as my life's concerned. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of other stories that are out there. Most of them are pretty depressing. But I thought the Africa one was definitely interesting and worth a conversation on my brain dump day. And the second one being the no stamp on the passport thing. I've been seeing this coming. Most of the countries I go into now don't require me to go through and do everything. Again, it's all biometric and everything else. So I knew the day was coming for my daughters there, and to hear them when she sent my middle daughter sent me the information, and I read it, and then we saw the other 2 daughters comment about how depressing that was. I was kind of like, I wonder how many people it's going to affect, or if anybody's even going to give a crap. Right. That's kind of where I'm at with everything. So we did a lot of work yesterday on the property. I have one day with no rain today. I'm actually very concerned today that I may not be able to do what we needed to do on this coming Friday, because after the rains, I have a new sinkhole in my yard. Apparently, the cistern that we filled up, it was longer than we thought. And while we backfilled all of it and everything else, the rain saturated the ground, and now I have a big 18-foot hole going straight down, and the dirt fell into the portion of the cistern. So now I've got to call the county today and get them to come out on Monday, and I have to find out if I can just dump sand and rock down it, or if I'm going to have pay another tremendous amount of money for a company to come out and pour more concrete down into it, and then run another set of tests to make sure that there's no danger to having that out there. So I think this time I'm also just going to have a giant backhoe come and dig the entire thing out, which is just ripping up more yard, unfortunately, and make sure that there is no more expanse or any more area that we can go into. So apparently the cistern I have was called a divided cistern. And so imagine a big box that is built, and then what they did is it had 3 levels. And so what would happen is one would have the highest level, and it would, as it would fill, it would overflow into the next one, and the one that was furthest down, and my measurements are off. If the thing was, let's say, 20 feet deep, the first one would be probably at 19 feet, would fill, and then you'd have an overflow, and that one would be at 16 feet, and then the last one would maybe be at 12 feet. And what would happen is the sediment would keep filling the one, and the one that's the tallest actually used to have a thing that you could pull up, so you could go down in there and you could actually suck sediment out of it. You had to be able to access the cistern, but the other two didn't have that, and so water would come up and would overflow and leave the sand and all the stuff in the first one. Then it would go over to the second one, and apparently you're drawing water from the other two, not the big one. I didn't realize that. So apparently we backfilled maybe the first one and the second one. This one seems to be all the way down. It was significantly further away from the house on the downward slope than I would have thought. And yeah, big hole. I mean, it was big enough that I wouldn't have noticed it if my dog hadn't have stuck his head down the hole. And if he had been clumsy and fallen into it, it would have been Lassie at the bottom of the well type situation. And he or she, because I have a male and a female, they would have fallen quite the distance. But the hole was about that big around, just straight tube, straight down. So, I think I'm screwed. I think that this is going to be another backfill situation, and I think that it's going to postpone me getting my house jacked up and getting it stabilized so I can get a new porch on and get the roof done. And yeah, I feel like time is running out quick. I mean, it's September, but it is not uncommon for us to get snow in October. And yeah, dude, and dudettes, whoever the people watching, I have to say I'm first year. I'm kind of in panic mode for what we're going to do. We may actually just end up moving into either the guest property, which is not ideal, or we even talked about putting an RV next to the house, and moving and living in the RV with having access to the kitchen and all the main things in the house. But who knows? I don't know. Too late in the season to, we're not going to get a house built this year. Wow. So anyway, brain dump. So today I've got a bunch of work to do. I'm going to get here off in a couple of minutes, go out, walk the dogs, let them run around for a little bit. And then I have a bunch of, I think tomorrow I'm cutting timber. I might actually bring a camera out for that. I'm not going to stream, but I might take a camera out and show you and film, and then I can run the video on Monday morning or Tuesday's show of what it's like to fell trees for doing firewood. These are all pretty big trees, but they're all dead. And then you have to do it. You have to break them down, then you haul them in, then you do it. And then I get a good workout. I take a mallet and wedges, and I split all the wood by hand, which is why I was looking for a bunch of high school kids to come help me. Because at 55 years old, I'm not nearly as fast at splitting wood as I used to be. Picture the Avengers movie where Iron Man and Captain America are out there splitting wood at Hawkeye's family farm, and I would be Iron Man, which is, Captain America just grabs the axe and takes one big swing and it breaks apart. And here's he wasn't Iron Man though. It was Tony Stark without the uniform. Tony Stark's swinging and he gets it after a couple of hits, but it's not like Steve hitting it and shatters, each time he hits it. I'm not even as physically fit now as a Tony Stark was in the movie. I can usually I usually end up having to take about 5 or 6 swings to break a round. And depending on if it's oak or what type of material it is, it'll probably be a couple of wedges. You got to get it set in there, and then you got to get it. And the deeper it goes, it starts to crack. And then when you get a big enough crack, you can put a second wedge in there so you can spread the crack, and then it just follows the grain that breaks apart. And then you got to do it. You have to cut them for my fireplace here in the fireplace at my house, we're looking at about 14-inch wide and about that big around, or that big of a section. And then you put 2 or 3 of those in the fireplace and they last a couple of hours. But again, I've got to do 10 cord. And for those of you who don't know what a cord is, it's a measurement, and it's 4 foot by 4 foot by 8 foot is a cord. So it has to be 4 foot wide. So imagine a piece of plywood. A plywood is 4 by 8. So when we do a cord, we'll actually put a piece of plywood down, and it has to be the length of the plywood, the width of the plywood, and then 4 foot tall. That's a cord of wood. And I need 10 of those. And so 4 by 4 by 8. So usually that means you're doing 3 stacks wide by 8 foot long, and again 4 foot high. It's a lot of wood. And then I can usually, inside the house, if I had my porch that hadn't gotten ripped off, we usually can put 1 cord of wood on the porch, which is your draw, and then everything else is in a wood-shed. And then when we start to draw down, again, when we first moved up here, I had 3 daughters. Everybody would go out there and we'd take wheelbarrows and bring it and stock the wood again. And, a cord of wood would last you about a month, probably, depending on how bad the weather is outside. There's times that it gets like -15, -20 degrees with the wind chill factor here. And at that point, your burning gets much higher. When it's below freezing, it's usually not that bad. But anyway, I've got to go get that done. So that's going to be fun if I can beat the rain, get the trees felled. I don't know how much splitting I'll get done, but I need to get down about, probably 5 or 6 trees to get that done. So anyway, that's my day. Oh, and then at 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I don't know if I'm doing community day. It's that seal. What's his name? Anybody remember his name? Not my favorite Pokemon. I don't know if it's worth a long drive to me to go and try to catch him on a community day like today. I'm definitely not driving all the way into Des Moines. I would probably make the drive that you guys did with me the other day, which is drive down to Creston and play there from 2 to 5, if that even makes sense. Or I think it probably makes sense for me to spend the 3 hours cutting wood and just not even worry about community day today. But if you guys are doing community day, Aussies are already done. If you guys are doing community day, good luck today. Enjoy it. Enjoy your Saturday. I hope the weather's beautiful and you guys are getting to spend times with friends or family. Enjoy everything. I will, again, not on tomorrow. I will be on a Monday morning, bright and early, 7 a.m. And then remember, Monday night, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, we will have a Trainer Club on, and we will be discussing how we're going to be moving forward with card things, maybe doing a match. And it's Matthew's birthday shout out day. So we'll definitely make sure we have that. Thank you guys. Have a tremendous day and a tremendous rest of your weekend. Peace.